Master Tavern Keeper's History of the Old World.
So, Master Alchemist, in your retelling of the massacre at Vinwood, I couldn't help but notice the absence of Prince Donalbain and his entourage. Where was he whilst his allies, the McCumans, were committing murder most horrid upon the field of play? Oh, yes, indeed. He was not at Vinwood. No, Donalbain had journeyed inland separately to try and recruit others to the cause of the Alliance. But his only success had been the infamous drunks of Clan Maoláin. Ah, yes. Now, in the play, it had been his great oration that had swayed the Maoláins to his banner. If I recall right, it went something like this. Our country sinks beneath the yoke. It weeps, it bleeds. And each new day, a gash is added to her wounds. O Albion, let us end this choke. Hold joined hands with me and be... Can I just stop you there, Septimus, though? I'm pretty sure the real Donalbain didn't say any of that. Oration, nay, just regular conversation even, were definitely not where his skills shone. I think rather it was his broad and deep pay chest that brought the Maoláins to his side. That and the large barrel of whiskey he gifted to the clan laird Docol Maoláin and his drinking lackeys. Ah, I see. Well, that does make a lot more sense. And so his great speech was naught but a construction of the playwright. What a shame. Well then, dare I ask, what of the monster of Loch Lorm? Was this too another piece of fiction? Oh no, don't worry on that point. The monster very much existed. Make no mistake about that. Ah, now that's more like it. Please, tell us more. Well, after gaining the fealty of Docco and his get, Donalbain led his forces, by the most direct route possible, out of the seat of Clan Maoláin, up through the highland of Lorm Valley, towards Castle Runsinane and McDeath. It was not an uneventful journey, though. Now, the valley had long been controlled by the Keeler clan, also known as the Maltmen of Lorm Valley, who were well known back then as the king's own malters, and had provided whiskey to the king's court since the time of King Dunco's father. During the reign of McDeath, their power was waning though, but they still had the largest distillery in all of Albion. The design and layout of the distillery was the brainchild of Brúben Keeler. It consisted of 3 linked buildings, a dormitory, a storehouse, and the stillhouse itself. It was here that the distilling took place. It began with malting, then mashing, next the fermenting, and finally the distilling. The Keelers had got the whole thing down to a fine art, and their process has served as a template for making whiskey up and down the country ever since. The whiskey from Loch Lorm was particularly famed for its pure and unsullied taste. This was because of the water that they used. It was taken from the nearby Lorm Beck, a mountain brook known for its clear, sparkling quality, as well as the fact that it also fed the waters of Loch Lorm itself, the lair of the equally famous monster. Ah, I see. And so what of the monster? On stage it was represented by a simple pair of gnashing jaws attached to a long snakeskin. But what was the beast really like? Oh well, from the descriptions I've heard, that's not too far off the mark. The old stories described it as a large reptilian beast with thick scaly skin, a long, wide, gaping maw, and tall frilled fin running along its skull. Its body was covered in a thick, bony carapace from which deadly spikes and horns protruded, as well as 4 taloned fins for limbs and a short, scaly tail. It lived at the bottom of the loch for centuries and kept the narrow valley around the loch free from the taint of man until the Keelers came. The beast was old by the time the distillery was constructed, and it seemed to spend most of its time sleeping in the watery depths. Its eyesight in particular seemed to have deteriorated and relied on acute hearing to catch its prey. As a result, the keelers had learned to take certain precautions in order to avoid attracting the attentions of the hungry monster. They used to toss animal carcasses into the loch to sate its hunger, and would never raise their voices above a murmur as they worked. The maltmen, who used to have to go near the loch as part of their work, went so far as to wrap bandages around their boots to muffle them, and in this way both the maltman and the monster coexisted in relative peace. Oh, yeah, now I have faced my fair share of monsters in the dungeons of the old world, but never have I seen a creature like that. I would sorely like to test my mettle against such a beast. Oh, rather you than me. I encountered one of these creatures, at least I think so, whilst I was up north, studying with the venerable Lowen. It was a terrifying sight. Fortunately, the old Truthsayer was most proficient in the magic of Gur, and was able to pacify the monster and send it back to the depths to slumber, but it had already caused quite a bit of harm to the locals there. Oh, my goodness. But I think that's enough scene setting. Let's get to the skirmish at Loch Lorm. Prince Maoláin came from the south and entered the valley close to the woods near the ford through Lorm Beck, just shy of where she spills into Loch Lorm itself. He was accompanied by the magician Mirgrey Colkener, the clan laird Docko McCooligan, and around 30 clansmen. Mirgrey knew all about the monster of Loch Lorm and was extremely concerned. The clansmen and McCooligan were a noisy bunch at the best of times, but even more so when roused for battle. They were renowned for shaking their battle rattles and shouting unrepeatable war cries at the top of their lungs upon spying the enemy. Exactly the sort of behaviour that would draw out the monster like a bear to a beehive. Maoláin had hoped to simply skirt past the distillery on the way to Castle Runsanane, but as soon as Docko and the rest of the clan spied it, they were determined to storm the compound and carry away all of the liquor. Now, as it happens, the maltmen had just completed a very large order for the court of McDeath and were about to transport it to the castle. It had taken the better part of 3 months to distill, and the entire consignment of 12 full barrels were about to be heaved out of the storehouse, loaded onto a rickety old dray, and depart, when Maoláin and the McCooligans arrived. For the keelers, this consignment was key to their survival. They had pulled all of their resources into its production, and if it was lost, then so were they, as they would have neither the money to pay back their creditors, nor to buy ingredients and resources to continue. Times were hard for everyone back then, but particularly those who had fully embraced the economic revolution that Dunco's father had brought about. Many of the most savvy men and women in East Albion had initially become very wealthy when he had first introduced the concept of money, the leaders of these families becoming the thanes we've been talking about. But as the reality of the exploitive system of credit and debt became apparent, each fell into hardship as all the wealth slowly trickled into the hands of the most powerful, with McDeath being foremost amongst these. This was, of course, another factor that contributed to the rise of the alliance against him. After the end of McDeath's reign, it was with a sigh of relief that the use of money was abandoned and forgotten in favour of a return to stability, self-sufficiency, and mutual cooperation within individual communities. Anyhow, let's get back to the fighting. Docko and the McCooligans immediately let out a cheer as they spied the distillery. Which was immediately joined by a roar as the monster of the loch awoke, and the sentry on top of the still could not help but spot the McCooligans and the monster and raise the alarm.
Intruders! Grab your weapons. Ugh, the monster too has awoken.
Donalbain and Mirgrey too noticed the reptilian head momentarily rise up before again disappearing into the waters of the loch.
Doko McCooligan, a worthy laird and leader. In the loch there lies a beast, a sleepy bottom feeder. What was it we spoke of? To avoid being beaten. At this noise he will awake and will end up being eaten.
But Doko and his get did not hearken to the magician's words, and instead brought out the battle rattles and charged across the ford of Lorm Beck. Doko led all 30 of his clansmen across the ford, with Donalbain and Mirgrey sullenly accompanying them. At the alarm, Reuben Keeler led the 10 or so malters in the distillery compound out of their dormitories to man the stout fence and face the interlopers. Additionally, back over at the Keeler Inn, just into the north there, another 5 maltmen too stormed out to see what was going on. The McCooligans roared with battle lust to see their foes, and, ignoring the shouts from Mirgrey to be quiet, shook their battle rattles once more and raced towards their foes. Of the 36 men, around 10 made their way towards the inn, and the rest moved to storm the distillery. Behind them, the monster dragged itself out of the waters near the ford and lumbered after the bulk of the McCooligans, its maw gnashing in its eagerness to feed. The clansmen remained unaware, though, and moved out of line of sight of the defenders, back behind the hill that lay between them and the distillery, before moving into the nearby woods, all the while shaking their battle rattles and shouting curses as they went. This movement inadvertently saved a number of their lives, though, as the monster couldn't follow them into the dense thicket of the copse. Mirgrey and Donalbain were all too aware of the creature, though, and broke off from the clansmen. The wizard climbed the hill, whilst the heir to the throne, slowed down by his armour, decided to make up for his slowness by making directly for the main gate. If they're going to do this, they needed to be quick. The maltmen in the compound amassed to protect the gate, and, upon reaching the top of the hillock, Mirgrey saw this and cast a fireball at them, slaying a trio of them, sending Reuben running for cover and causing the gate to catch fire. Off to the north, the maltmen from the inn charged towards the McCooligans, but the ungodly noise made by the clansmen sent a wave of fear running up through the spines of the Keelers, and they could not bring themselves to charge their foes. The 10 McCooligans sent to deal with them, though, had no such qualms, and charged the malters, crashing into them and cutting them down as they stood. The screams of the dying drawing the monster from the loch to them. Back on the hill, Mirgrey cast another fireball at the maltmen at the gate, killing another 2 and causing the gate to collapse just as Donalbain reached it, his double-handed sword held high. Behind him, he could hear the bloodthirsty cries of Doko and the McCooligans growing nearer as they left the woods and ran at the open gate. Back by the inn, a single malter remained standing after the initial charge by the McCooligan clansmen, but perhaps he'd have preferred to have been killed on their blades, as, upon hearing the roar of the beast behind them, the clansmen broke off from their attack and moved towards the inn, leaving the last stunned, blood-splattered Keeler between them and the Loch Lorm monster. The beast raised up its head high before lunging down and biting deep into the torso of the unlucky whiskey worker, bloodily cutting him in 2 before greedily feasting upon the dead man. Back at the compound, Donalbain found himself fighting as the leader of the Keelers, the portly Reuben. The malter was no match for Donalbain, and the heir to the throne parried Reuben's curved blade out of the way and thrust his own blade deep into the man. Reuben slumped over onto the blade with a howl of pain, apparently dead. But suddenly, Donalbain felt his strength drain out of him, and he staggered back, releasing his weapon. Reuben didn't fall over. Instead, he stood, his sword glowing with power. He pulled Donald Bain's weapon out of his body, and the king's heir saw the wound begin to immediately heal. Behind him, the remaining Keelers assembled and began to move on Donald Bain. Oh, yeah. Was this Reuben some kind of undead creature or something? What was going on? Now Heinrich, you see, it wasn't the man. It was the sword. Reuben wielded the legendary blade, the Malter's falchion, that was able to drain the strength out of its enemies and heal the wielder of the weapon. There are even rumours that it allows the bearer to breathe underwater. Anyhow, before the restored Reuben and his men could hack the unarmed Donald Bain to pieces, Docco and the McCooligans burst through the open gate and threw themselves at the Maltmen and their leader, their frenzied hacking, cutting down their foes in an orgy of bloodletting. And back down by the inn, the clansmen there all fled into the building to avoid the monster, leaving it to feed upon the fallen. The beast quickly became sated before dragging itself off back into the waters of the loch to sleep off its hearty meal.
By the gods, yet another brutal and tragic massacre of innocents. I'm beginning to see the tale in a whole new light.
It is no bedtime story for children, to be true, but acts such as this are commonplace, both on Albion and here in the old world. To pretend otherwise would be to willingly close your eyes to the knife's edge of existence we all inhabit. Ever since the coming of chaos, we have known only strife and war, and so shall it be until the end times. Our collective psyche is scarred by its unnatural presence, and it twists and bends each and every skein of fate, no matter how trivial, towards death, misery, and destruction. To fight on and live is the best we can ever hope for. Your words cut deeper than any blade, Master Alchemist. I'm a truthsayer. Even if it is hard to say, I must speak the truth.
But, Sedrik, just to change tack, what about the booze?
Ach, should have known you'd not forgotten about that. Well, the losses for the McCooligans had been slight, and with the deaths of all the Keelers, they loaded up all of the barrels of whiskey onto the dray and left with the entire consignment, easily having enough alcohol to get them to Castle Runsanane. But before they reached there, Donald Bain and the McCooligans were to rendezvous with the forces of Harkness, who had been recruited by the valiant warrior John Quicksure, and together they would battle against Macbeth's lieutenant, Ian MacGregor, Governor Dungal Hill. And it's here we will once more meet the giant, Malcolm Grimmock, and some of Macbeth's own orcs. Rest assured, once more the blood will flow like a river before the final battle against Macbeth at his castle.